Bonsoir. The rest of the talk will be in English. But yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm very grateful to the Geneva Water Hub for organizing this event. Unfortunately, the scene it's a bit ugly location, but that's okay. I think everyone seems okay. So yeah, so you heard that I'm from a civil engineering department, and I also do a bit of applied economics. So you might be wondering, why are they inviting engineers to a session on dam politics and the politics of water? So hopefully this talk will make that clear. And maybe the title already helps. Can tracking multiple sustainable development goals and benefits and costs of dams help negotiated solutions? So I have 14 minutes, and I will try to speed through this and give you a message. So one could say that there's a global boom in hydropower projects. This is you'll see this slide probably several times tonight. This slide shows almost an alarming picture. That there's all sorts of dam projects being started around the world, and these are dams of different sizes, different types, but it's linked to, and we'll probably hear about that, new funders of dams. That used to be just IFC and World Bank. Now there's all sorts of funders. The private sector is a bigger role, and so you know, the question is, these new dams have the potential to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but poorly designed dam projects will exacerbate social and political instability and environmental degradation. So how can we make sure that dams get those benefits but don't become a destructive social and environmental force? So to do that, maybe there's some key questions about, and what I'm interested in is decision making on dams. So are there, you know, key questions will be, well, what's happening now? How are decisions being made about dams? How could they improve? You know, what should be improved, and how could that be done? So the reason why I was invited is I'm part of this $10 million FutureDAMS project. And the DAMS doesn't stand for the engineered structure. It stands for Design and Assessment of Water, Energy, Food, Environment Megasystems. So when you think about it, a dam is much more than just a concrete wall or a civil structure. It's really a choice by society to completely change the function and the benefit distribution of environmental and human and economic systems. So it's a very strong decision. And this research project has a goal of developing a world where developing countries make rapid progress towards the SDGs by selecting, designing, and financing and managing dams and systems of dams to meet local, national, and regional development needs, in addition to being Paris compliant. So who's involved? This is certainly not an academic talk, but you know, this project is going to try to be inspired from these different fields of study. And the part that I'm going to show today is maybe most linked to, well, it actually covers all of them, hopefully. So I'm not going to talk about the entire project, but I'm going to talk about a new framework for decision making that we hope to introduce in this project. Here are just some of the people involved. You can see that it's a lot of researchers from the UK, but there are researchers from around the world. And then the most exciting part is we have these wonderful case studies in Myanmar, in the Volta River Basin, in West Africa, in East Africa, and in the Middle East. So we have fantastic collaborators which make this project possible. And this is just giving you a visual view of where we're going to work in this 4-year, $10 million project. So, okay, now this is the only sort of theoretical slide I'm going to show you. So this framework for decision making in complex human environmental resource systems. So the problem with dams is that they're really an intervention which has impacts on economy, on sociology, on biology, not just engineering and finance. It's a multifaceted problem. And so we will use engineering and economic quantitative tools, but I'm going to tell you a story of that approach through just visually. So this is only going to be through pictures. So, and instead of giving theoretical slides, I thought I would start by showing you a narrative of this approach, which is actually not one of our case studies. This is a prior work that we did with some of the Bretton Woods institutions in Washington, D.C. And this was done in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, ERM, and Mont McDonald. We work a lot with IUCN, which is just down the street here, but this particular project was with the Nature Conservancies. So here we were working with a group of financiers that wanted to fund one of these dams in this figure. And I won't say which one because I don't think I was authorized to. But anyways, they had the question a few months before the project started, and they said, well, wait a minute, is there any combination of these other dam sites that could be better? So none of these dams exist. This is all virgin forest. And the idea is, there's one large dam which is being planned, but their question a bit late in the process was, is any combination of other dams in that system more beneficial and have less negative impacts than the one that they're currently going to build? So when we heard that was their question, even though we're a research institute, we jumped in and we tried to do consulting in this project, because this is exactly the type of project, this is the type of question that we think people making decisions on dams should be posing. So the first thing that we did is we tried to understand for the different stakeholders, both the ones who were financing it, but also the ones who were going to be involved in the country itself, what are the things that people care about? What are the metrics of performance with which we can judge whether these are good investments or not? So the first thing that was done, and this was done by the Nature Conservancy, is try to map out what kind of indigenous people, what would be the sociological impacts of having to move people in these dams. The dams would obviously create an area that people would have to be removed. So how can we minimize that? How can we make decisions about reservoirs which takes that into consideration? Then Nature Conservancy was very interested in minimizing the number of kilometers of migratory fish paths that would be destroyed. Obviously, there are real benefits of hydropower and dams, but can we make those decisions to minimize environmental damage and maximize environmental benefits and ecosystem benefits? This is another one related to that. The Washington, D.C. institution that was involved in this, has a policy that they don't hurt large mammals. So if the dam is going to hurt apes, forget it. So this was also one of the criteria that they were going to use, and they wanted to make decisions based on, can we minimize the ape habitat that would be disturbed? Okay, so here's a slightly more theoretical slide, and I invite you to look first at the left figure, right? So what you see there is that all these points represent options, okay? They could be different houses that are on the market, or they could be, in this case, a system of investments, in this case, it's a system of dams. And you can see here that every point represents the resilience of that particular portfolio of engineered assets. And on the x-axis, it's the cost. So you can see here that each point represents a combination of different dams that we could create, and they have a different score. And you can see that some score low on resilience, some score high, and some scored poorly on cost, and some score well on cost, so low cost versus high cost. You can see here that there seems to be some kind of trade-off, right? If you're performing relatively poorly in resilience, then you have favorable cost. Whereas if you do very well in resilience, then your cost tends to be high. And that's typically something that we see in all human decisions, is that you can't have everything that you want. You always have to compromise, and there are often, in almost all human decisions, there's trade-offs. And so hopefully you can see visually that in this plot, if each of one of these points represents a combination of investments in dams, all sorts of different combinations of dams, you can see here that we're scoring them. And obviously, the red points are what an economist would call dominated, and the blue points are what an economist would call efficient points, what an engineer would call non-dominated or optimized points. And if you're a member of the general public, you might just say that the blue points are the ones that make more sense, because you're getting the best resilience for a certain amount of money, right? For any level of resilience, you're getting the lowest cost option. So these blue points are the ones that we're going to be particularly interested in. Now, the problem is I showed you several criteria that we were interested in. This plot here on the left only shows 2 criteria. So how can we change this plot so that we can see more criteria? And that's what this plot on the right says. You see these 9 blue points, the 9 blue circles, right? They have become these lines, okay? So hopefully this is clear to everyone, because this is a relatively simple plot, because this is what we actually delivered to the client. we gave them a website. So this was an interactive website. Now, if you understood this, does everyone understood the blue points, that the blue points are better than the red points? Okay, so the blue points have become blue lines. And remember, your best is up. So what a perfect series of dams would be a flat line across the top. You could see that that would have very high firm energy, perfect fish habitat, lots of total energy, lots of biodiversity, perfect conditions for apes, no disturbance to indigenous peoples, no disturbance, zero infrastructure assets, and zero investment in wetlands. So you can see that all these different combinations are equally optimal, right? The computer has filtered through. What's happened here is that what we've used an algorithm. We filtered through all the millions and millions and millions of investment packages that are the red ones so that we can identify the few dozen or few hundred that are the blue ones here, okay? So these lines that you're seeing here are about 200 portfolios of investments in dams that the computer couldn't find a better solution for, and that's called multi-criteria optimization. So the reason why I said that this was a website is that we allow people to interactively filter this. So you can see here, this is what you can see here. This is the full set of efficient combinations of dams. And you can see here that the Ministry of Energy has put a box around the total energy. So there's a filter box there. And they've said, okay, we want at least 7 gigawatts of power. But then you can imagine that the finance minister would say, oh, well, you're only getting $4 billion. So right away, even though it looked like there was a very confusing decision problem there, you can see that just with 2 ministers, we've already filtered it down to just a few options that perform very well. So hopefully this has given you a visual feel of how this framework works. And what I haven't described is, do we actually apply this with real people? So in this case, we were working just with a few technocrats and people from the ministry. It was a relatively small group of people. But we have done work like this with an enormous public-facing project in Eastern England, where I work. And so this is the entire east of England. Hopefully you can see it in the map there. And here there's a very large group of stakeholders who are involved. It's a large regional water system. There's many challenges, climate change, growth, and there's utilities that are considering how to expand their system. But it's a very controversial system because there's environmental benefits and energy sector benefits, agricultural benefits, and these are all the people that are involved. So initially, and I'm just going to give you a visual story here because I only have 1 minute. Initially, we thought that we would have these objectives. We would want to minimize the capital cost, minimize the operating cost, minimize the regional deficits, and minimize the number of failures we would get, the water supply failures. And so we thought it would be relatively straightforward. Unfortunately, what we found after a 3-year public-facing stakeholder process, that the plots that people were looking at were more like this, okay? The stakeholders were interested in dozens and dozens and dozens of metrics. They only wanted to make decisions considering actually almost up to 200 metrics. So a lot of academics told me, oh, this multi-criteria analysis, is clearly an academic pipe dream. This is ridiculous. Only academics would do something as stupid as this. And actually, the stakeholder said, 4 objectives? After a few weeks, they said, no, there's no way we're making decisions based only on 4 objectives. We want to evaluate hundreds of metrics of performance, and we want to evaluate the distribution of benefits by sector and by region, and that's why you have so many of these, is that, this is a very large system. So the government might be interested in the total economic benefits, but if you're in a region that's only 1/5 of this plot, you're not really interested in benefits throughout the system. You may only be interested in your own. So that leads to something like this. This is the reality of multi-sector, multi-region, multi-criteria planning. Okay, my time is up. So here is just to say that this is all very data intensive. So we have some online tools which help access all this, and that brings me to my last slide. Just saying that, leave you with some conclusions. So this engineering talk, hopefully you can see now the link towards exploring dam politics, rivalry, power, and hope, because I think using the right approaches and involving the public and relevant stakeholder groups, you can really be hopeful that dams will be positioned well in the future. We've tracked benefits covering and costs over space and time to help negotiate interventions in complex human environment systems. We've assessed the trade-offs between the highest performing intervention bundles, and it's a solid foundation for collaborative planning and negotiation. And concluding, with appropriate approaches, processes, and tools, collaborative natural resource management is possible and effective. Thank you very much.